Hi there, this is Jen, and thanks for joining me today. Today I am using this awesome new stamp set from Pawsome Stamps called Happy Haunting. It is part of the release that came out this month, and it is a release that's full of Halloween and fall themed items. And I picked this out because I really wanted to make a trifold card. I had received a card for Mother's Day, and it was this beautiful trifold card, and ever since then I was wanting to make a trifold. And so this stamp has, or this stamp set has, so many stamps in it that I thought it would be perfect. So to make the trifold, I am actually going to use a piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock that originally is 9 by 12, which means that the finished card is going to be a little bit smaller than an A2 size. And so I want to go ahead and trim this before I get started. And so I am trimming on the long side, and I want to trim that down to 5.5. And so that is going to be the width of the card, and then across the length of the card it will be 12 inches long, because that is how long the paper is. And so basically I just cut on the long side at 5.5. So I'm going to have a 4 by 5.5 size card when it's finished and folded. And since I will be stamping and ink blending, I didn't want to make the score lines already. So what I did is on the bottom of the cardstock, I marked off with a pencil really lightly every 4 inches. So it's going to be 3 sections that are 4 inches wide a piece. And so I made 2 marks so that I could go ahead and kind of get an idea of where to do my stamping. And the first stamp I'm going to use is the Haunted House stamp. And so I'm inking that up with some VersaFine black because I will be using watercolor markers, and the VersaFine is a pigment ink and it is waterproof, so the watercolor markers will not smudge with this ink. And I'm using a old stamping platform that I haven't pulled out in a while. It is a We Are Memory Keepers stamping platform, and I'm using it because this paper won't fit in my MISTI, and I was afraid that I would not get a good impression just freehanding it. And so this stamping platform is great because it has an open edge, which allows me to move the paper around and be able to use the platform to stamp up the entire card panel without having to kind of freehand it. And so I will be using the platform for all of my stamping on this panel today. And I love this haunted house, but I wanted it to be a little bit bigger. The haunted house is partially on the front of the card and partially on that first kind of fold when you open it up. And so I wanted to add a few extra rooms to the house. And so what I did is I created a mask and covered up the original haunted house that I had stamped there, and then I'm going to add just a little section of that. And so I have masked that off, and I will ink up the right hand side of the haunted house with some VersaFine, and I'm going to stamp that right over the original house so that there is a little bit more of the house on the inside of the card as well. And once I have that stamped up, I'm going to take the remaining stamps, and I believe the only stamps that I do not use in this set are the pumpkins. So everything else I have used, and I have actually used a couple extra ghosts as well. So I stamped up some of the ghosts more than once. But I'm going to do a bunch of ink blending on the background, and so I have created another mask for the house to cover up that extra addition that we added to it. And then I'm also going to go ahead and mask off everything that you see stamped there. So all the ghosts and the clouds and the graves are all masked off. And I'm also going to add a mask for the moon that I'm going to create. And so what I've done is I've taken some masking paper and a circle die from my stash, and I will go ahead and add the circle to mask off the moon shape. And then when we're finished doing the ink blending, I will go ahead and use that negative portion as well. But I'm going to start with my ink blending. And so around the moon, I am using the colors of a mustard seed and card pumpkin. I am using some distress inks with a blending brush. And so I'm going to go ahead and add those colors. And when I'm blending the colors, I am adding the first color and then adding the second color. And what I usually try and do to get more of a kind of a blended edge is I try and go back over with that first color, so that I'll do a little bit of the orange and then I'll go back over with the blending brush, not putting any extra ink on it, but just going over with that yellow a blending brush and kind of smoothing out the transition between the two colors. And I'm basically going to do that over the entire panel. And I won't bore you with all of the ink blending, but I just want to show kind of the transitions and let you know what colors I'm using. And so the next color I'm using is Picked Raspberry, and I'm doing it on the right and left side of the card. So I do take that same color and add it to both sides of the haunted house. And the next color I'm going to use is the Seedless Preserve. So I'm going to go ahead and follow the same thing that I have been doing with blending the colors together. And then the last color that I use before I put the color around the edges is the Villainous Potion. So again, I'm going to do the left and right hand side of the panel. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some black soot and I'm just going around the edges, and then I also go up kind of into the graveyard. Wasn't quite sure how I was going to make those not look like they were just floating in the air, and so I started out by adding a little bit of black soot to kind of mark where the graves were, and then I'm going to take that color around the entire outside of the card to kind of frame that off and make the inside color stand out a little bit. And then the fun part is removing the mask, but I'm going to just remove the moon mask first because I still need to do a little bit of ink blending. So I'm taking that negative mask that was left over from that die cut circle, and I'm going to place that so that I can color the moon. And the colors that I'm going to use to color the moon are the Picked Raspberry, which pretty much stays on the outside really lightly. I didn't want it too dark, and I try to leave a little bit of white space in the middle. And then around the edges of that mask, I'm going to use some aged mahogany just to define that a little more and darken that up. And then the big reveal with removing the remaining masks. And I usually don't color until after the masks are removed, just because coloring for me usually is the most labor intensive part. And I would be heartbroken if I messed it up somehow and had to go back and recolor. So I do go ahead and leave the white underneath the mask until I have done whatever else I'm doing. And then for the front of the haunted house, I just took a micron pen and added a little bit of a drive, I guess you could say. And then I'm taking a wet paintbrush and just running it back and forth in front of those gravestones, and I'm trying to remove a little bit of that color because I'm going to go in and add some more distress inks to make it more look like a hill or gravestones on a hill instead of them just kind of randomly floating in the air. But I'm just taking some water here on a paintbrush and adding some water spots to the card, and then I'm going to take this blending, it's like a blending brush, it's just in a pen form almost, and I'm going to take that and add a little more detail around the gravestones with some ink just to make it look more like they're on a hill. And then for the moon, I traced around it in a black micron pen. I messed it up, and so what I ended up doing was adding kind of a zigzag pattern around the edge to kind of cover and hide that. And then, of course, I'm going to add splatter. I love adding splatter, so I'm going to add, I don't recall if this is gouache or liquid ink, but I'm adding some white splatter. I am adding some liquid acrylic and black to add the black spots, and I'm also going to add a little bit of gold metallic watercolor, so I'm just splattering that all over the panel. And then once I am done with that, I'm going to add the sentiments. And so I'm going to go ahead and use my platform again and ink that up in some VersaFine and stamp that where it's going to be on the inside of the card. And then I went ahead and I took a little stamping block and I'm going to stamp the bats. So there is a bigger bat in this set and then a smaller bat, and I'm just using some VersaFine black to go ahead and stamp up several of those around the card. The other sentiment that's going to show on the outside is that boo sentiment, and I just took a die from my stash that's kind of like a speech bubble, and that is going to be the card panel. And now I'm just going to add the score lines. So I'm going to add a score line at 4, and then my scoreboard is small, so I'm going to flip that around and add 4 inches from the other side. So it is 12 long altogether, so that means that each section will be 4 inches, and then I'm going to fold out the top portion, that will be the outside, and then I'm going to fold in the fold on the inside, and that's going to give me my trifold. And I have to say, this was an absolute blast to create. This stamp set is so super adorable. It is so perfect for Halloween. It's super cute. So I hope you check out the new release. The design team has lots of inspiration on the Pawsome Stamps YouTube channel as well as the blog. There's also lots of inspiration on the website for the shop for Pawsome Stamps. So if you check that out, you can see a lot of different ways to use the stamp sets. But that is it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please go ahead and give a thumbs up. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today, and I hope to see you soon.